Hi everyone! Welcome to the iSpring webinar series, where every week we talk about e-learning trends, share iSpring tips and tricks, and cover clients' cases. My name is Kate. I'm a community manager at iSpring, and I will be the moderator for today's session. And today's webinar is dedicated to how can we maintain the digital momentum within education. And to cover this topic, to understand this topic, we've invited James Kift. James is a teacher and a tech blogger. He has a wealth of teaching experience with over 20 years teaching across further and higher education. Hi, James. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Kate. Really looking forward to today's webinar.
Great, great. I'm so excited about today's presentation too. So at this point, James, I'm ready to pass mic over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be sharing. I'm going to share my screen with you now. Just bear with me a moment.
Yes, I can see your
That's
screen.
Great, thank you. So as Kate said, we're going to explore how can we maintain the digital momentum within education. For those of you who attended, I'm sure you've seen the text sort of setting out the context for this webinar. As was mentioned in the introduction, I've had many years teaching across further and higher education in the UK and across the globe. As we've returned back to face-to-face teaching, one of the topics that constantly comes out when I'm talking to colleagues is, having done lots of digital stuff whilst we were locked down during the pandemic, now we're back in the classroom, there seems less interest, yet there's so many positives as to why we should continue using digital within the classroom. So what I'm going to do through the rest of this webinar is explore some of those ideas to see how we can maintain that digital momentum. So before we go any further, what I'd like to find out from those in the audience is what type of role you do currently. So if you're a teacher, if you could put teacher in the chat. If you're a digital technologist, please put that in the chat. If you're maybe a school or college admin, just to give you an idea of the audience that I've got here. So in the chat, please, if you could enter those, that would be fab. Thank you. Excellent. So we've got a real variety. Fabulous. Some instructional designers, producers of e-learning content, LMS consultants. So a real mix. That's absolutely great. Fab. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. That's really helpful. So let's crack on then. So I was thinking as I approached this presentation, what was the key drivers that if I'm a teacher and I'm working with my students, what's the key driver that's going to want me to keep using digital? And I guess one of the key things, which is probably unquestionable, is the need to develop students' digital skills. We now know that digital skills are required. The pandemic showed how important they were. Digital skills are so important for our young people. Regardless of which industry they end up working in, they need to be able to have digital skills to function in those industries. So one of the ways that we can maintain that momentum is to tap into that desire for teachers to make sure their students are prepared for that next stage in life, whether that's going on to more education or whether that's going into training or employment. So one of the ways I think we can help to maintain that momentum is talking about the importance of digital skills. So as you'll see through this presentation, this webinar, I am a fan of an infographic. I do apologise. I'm going to put my hand up now. I'm an infographic addict. I do like my infographics. So this is one I just put together, really trying to shift the focus, not just talking about digital in broader terms with teachers and educators, but talking more about the specifics of those skills that our young people will need. And the types of tools that they could use. So for me, certainly having that focus on digital skills development, and preparing those young people for the next stage is one way that we can still highlight the importance and encourage colleagues to maintain their use of digital, even though we're back in a face-to-face environment. And on that front, I think it's very easy for lots of us to go, well, we're so used to either we're designing content, if that's our role, or we as the teacher are creating resources and content. I think it's quite nice to flip it on its head and get the students involved. We've just talked about the importance of developing students' digital skills. And I think there's a range of tools and processes that they can get involved in. And for me, a great way of checking their learning is if they can produce a quiz or an activity. They have to demonstrate their knowledge in creating that activity, which they can then share with their peers and use to check knowledge. So I think it's really good to when we're looking at all of the different tools, and we'll touch on a wide variety types of tools later on. It's great to get the students creating, get the students doing that work. One example I saw of this was a teacher set a research task. And this was a chef, so he was teaching cooking and hospitality, and he said, next week we're going to be making X. I'm not sure what it was, let's say an omelette or something. We're going to be making something. I'd like you to find examples of how to do that, resources, whether that's videos on YouTube or other resources, and got the students to curate content and explain why they thought that content was appropriate and how it could be used. So I think there's lots of opportunity there to get the students involved in that process, either creating content or researching and curating content that they can share. So I think that's one way of doing it, and it's a great way of obviously developing students' digital skills. So let's carry on. During the pandemic, obviously, everything moved to online. Those teachers who typically hadn't embraced digital their hand was forced, and they started to use digital, and we saw lots and lots of benefits, certainly from a purpose of accessibility. Historically, where students had either been excluded or were prevented from attending from health reasons or whatever, technology allowed all students to be involved in that process. And we saw, because focusing online can be quite challenging, we saw that teachers started to adapt the way that they did stuff. So the online bit that they were doing was very interactive, but the sharing of information happened before the session. So they would send out a video or something for the students to look at before then exploring it and having a discussion, either in breakout rooms or in some sort of activity. And I think that sort of rolls over into the face-to-face teaching and the face-to-face delivery. So certainly in the UK, and I don't know if there's pressures across the globe in this sort of thing, there's only a finite amount of time and access that students will have within lessons and within specialist spaces. So we talk about the hospitality students in those training kitchens on the college campus. They only may have so much access because we've got lots of students and it's trying to fit it all in. So if part of that time is taken up with presenting information and going through, maybe showing a video or a presentation, that can eat into the practical time that the teacher has and the student has to put stuff into practice. So one of the things that potentially can help staff to see the benefits of digital is freeing up that lesson time to really get into the nitty-gritty, the discussion or the practical activity, something about applying the activities in the lesson. So it can be a really great way of just saying, well, if you've got a member of staff who's reluctant or not sure what the benefits are of digital, it's a great way to say, well, okay, you've got a typical lesson is an hour and a half. That's what you've got in the kitchen. if you spent half an hour going through and showing them this and talking about that, that potentially would eat into that time. But if you were to share in advance a video with an activity, maybe a couple of questions or something, and then just did a quick recap at the start of the session, they would have more time for the practical aspect, or more time to explore and discuss the topic, which we know is where the students get the value. So for me, that's one thing that we can potentially do. And another reason why a way of enabling us, providing teachers with a positive reason to continue that use of digital, just giving them that more time in the classroom to explore the topics. So let's keep going. For me, this is a really big one. My current role in the college I work at is I train and develop staff. So I'm a trainer. I go in and deliver training sessions either in person or remotely with staff. And one of the things that I think we can all do is we can start to model those behaviours. So if there are particular techniques and tools and approaches that we think would be useful, we can start to use those with staff when we're interacting with staff. We can use them in the role that we're doing, so that staff can see how they're being done, the benefits of them. And I think one of the things, if I reflect back over the pandemic and the challenges of moving everyone online so swiftly, is the lack of confidence. It was the lack of confidence that some staff had in using technology. So by modelling behaviours, by demonstrating how we can use these different tools, I think it really helps teachers to grow their confidence. It also provides them with ideas of different ways in which they can utilise and make use of technology. So for me, modelling behaviours in whatever way you do it is a great way just to demonstrate to teachers how else they could use it. So that's one example of how we can start to get staff thinking about what they could be doing with digital. And also, again, going back to that, maintaining that momentum, giving them a reason to include it, because they can see quite clearly why they would include it. Okay. So for those of us who've been in the digital technology space, whether we're creators or teachers, every week there's a new site or a new tool or a new app that's out there, or there's a new feature within one of the creation tools that you may be using. And it's quite easy, I can imagine, as a teacher, just to get overwhelmed. I mean, I have my own little YouTube channel, and I thought I'd run out of content, but there's always something. So I think when we're working with teachers in whatever role we have, whether that's a content creator or managing an LMS, it's about just sort of not overwhelming them with throwing lots of different activities and tools and things that they can do with their students, or they can integrate into the resources that they're creating. It's about breaking it down and picking out 2 or 3 things that they could try to use with their students. Because, as I say, with such a lot of different types of resources available, it's easy for colleagues to be overwhelmed and not sure what to use. One of the things that we did at my organisation is we picked out four tools that we wanted colleagues to use. So we're an Office 365 institution, so we suggested that they use Microsoft Forms. We also wanted them to have some sort of quiz type tool. So there's obviously loads of those out there, sort of Kahoots and quizzes and all the rest of it. So we picked one of those for them to try. And then we wanted some sort of collaboration space. So we suggested Google Jamboard, but there's loads. There's Microsoft Whiteboard. Canva have just released a new interactive whiteboard type tool for collaboration. So it's about just picking out a couple and then thinking about how we can use them. And it's the same with the features on any of the content creation tools that you're using. It's thinking, which of those features are we going to suggest that staff use? And it's not always about the shiny new. For me, PowerPoint it's so flexible in what it can do. So I think it's important, and as a way of building staff confidence, which means they're more likely to use digital within their teaching, it's pointing them in the direction of familiar tools that they use, but they may not use in quite the full capacity of that tool. And I find that's been really useful. So as I said, I'm addicted to infographics, as you can see on the screen there. It's about lots of different ideas on how they could use those tools with their students. One idea I found that worked really well is getting students to collaborate. So providing them the opportunity to collaborate in different ways, and they can be used maybe at the start of a session. So as I use the chat for this session, we're asking you to say what role you did. So it could be that you use the PowerPoint as almost as like an interactive whiteboard type space, such as a Padlet, where you get them to put a text box, or you provide them a text box and you get them to put what they do, or how confident they are within those spaces. But it's about saying that here is a tool that you use maybe every day, but you could use it in so many more creative ways, and it could be much more fulfilling. And by doing that, we have lots of benefits. One, it builds their confidence, which means they're more likely to utilize it in those different ways. The other function it has is it enables the students to develop those digital skills, because they're utilizing those tools as they engage in the activities as part of a class, as part of the lesson that's happening, or if they engage in those activities as part of a homework. It's giving them an opportunity to use those particular tools and to develop their digital skills. So for me, that not always rushing to something new and something different, utilizing the tools that they've got available is a really powerful way to build their confidence as teachers, and to ensure that they make use of digital throughout their lessons whenever they feel the need to. So that's something. Don't throw out all of the traditional sort of productivity tools and look for something shiny and different when you can make so much use with those productivity tools. So let's. So one thing I'm really interested in is, when I started in education, everything was very much the device you had was typically some sort of fixed PC, and that's what you had within the space. Now, obviously, we've got a whole range of different devices. Potentially, students are coming into our teaching spaces with devices, and I'm really interested. So I can see we've got all sorts of different types of roles within the webinar today. Really interested when it comes to choosing the functionality and thinking about the activities you're creating. How many of you design for a range of devices, or consider the range of different devices that students could be accessing that content with? So I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, for those who absolutely think about the device that the student will view the content through, put in a 10. If you haven't really thought about what type of device the student is picking up, put a lower number. I think for certainly content that students are using remotely, we just don't know what devices that they're going to access that material from. So I think it's really important to have a think about whatever tool or function that we're doing, how will that function on a range of different devices. So we've got a real mixture, for some really high numbers to some really low numbers. So for me, certainly with any remote activities that we're asking students to do, either as part of homework, it's really thinking about the types of devices they've got. And we certainly found during lockdown, that's great, thank you for contributing that, a real mixture of responses. I think during lockdown, we found that we had to really think about what tools we were using, what activities we were creating, and how would they work. Because for some students, the only device they had was their mobile phone. So you can imagine creating some sort of drag and drop activity is quite difficult when you've just got your phone that you're trying to move stuff around. So it's about thinking about, when we're designing the content, thinking about the end user and the types of devices that they've got. So for me, my rules typically are try and get something that works, is device agnostic. So it's not something that requires you to have a fixed PC or computer that you're using. In my experience, typically things that have been designed to work in the browser work well. Obviously, there is a challenge that certain browsers work better than others. I think for me, I've always used Chrome historically. The latest version of Edge seems, because it's built on the Chromium platform, seems to be quite good, but they typically tend to remove some of the variations from device to device, or something that works in a browser. And then from a teacher perspective, login not required. This is really from the student's perspective, certainly for things that you're using in class. Things that you're using in class, requiring a log on, typically some students really struggle with the password, and that can delay them accessing that quiz or activity that you're doing in lesson. So that's where I put login not required. Obviously, for stuff that they're doing remotely, from a safeguarding perspective, you may require a login, but certainly it's about device agnostic and thinking about the types of activities that they're going to be doing, and will they work on a range of different devices. So that's something that I like to think about when I'm delivering sessions, when I'm helping colleagues in the designing and creating of content. How will that appear on a phone? And then just, I suppose, in the past 5 or 10 years, I can't remember when the Chromebook came out, some people will only have a browser. So it's thinking about how will that tool function completely as it should do without the requirement to install a piece of software. So that's certainly something that we have to think about. And I think, again, if we're linking it back to the digital momentum within education, it's about, again, it's from a staff perspective of thinking about, well, are they confident that that will work? Or are they going to have students with different types of devices, if that's what they're bringing into the session, going, well, it's not working on my device. So again, it's back to that staff confidence and making sure that if the educational institution that they work, that they've got students bringing their own devices in, which certainly in higher education happens a lot, that there isn't going to be a problem, that is going to function as it should do, regardless of the type of device they've got, whether that be a Chromebook, a Mac, or something else. So that's something certainly to consider. It's about the types of devices that the student's going to be engaging with content on. And then I suppose the big one, and we've touched on it quite a bit already today, is focusing on how those tools could be used with students. So those of you involved in creating learning content, absolutely, you're looking at thinking about what is the desired outcome, what are you trying to achieve with that piece of content or activity that you're designing. And it's the same when working with staff. It's about thinking about how and when those tools could be used, and it's providing lots of ideas as to when they could use it and what the purpose is. So that's one of the things I like to do. Again, another infographic. And I think, as I highlighted with PowerPoint, it's the same with quite a large range of tools, that they can be used in such a variety of different ways. And sometimes from a teaching perspective, they may be looking at it through a very narrow lens, in that they're thinking, well, it's just for this particular purpose. And they haven't thought about the wider applications and how it could be used, and the benefits to both them as the person organising and delivering the teaching, and to the student engaging in and interacting with the resources. So for me, it's about really thinking about how can we help teachers to explore how they can use the different activities and tools with the students, and also explore the benefits of those. I mean, that's one of the things. I think one common strand, and I've done a few events where I've spoken to educators from around the globe, and I think one universal thing that links them all together, in addition to their desire to help and support their learners to achieve, the one additional thing that the desire that links them is the fact that they all could do with more time. They're all, one of the big things that they're always saying is, I could do with a bit more time. So it's about another way to encourage and maintain that momentum is to highlight to the staff the benefits to them as staff. I think if you very rarely will you speak to a teacher who isn't a busy teacher, and I think that's the sorts of conversations they're having. Obviously, one deciding factor when using technology is how is it benefiting learning, and we're going to come on to explore that in a bit. But the other bit is, how is it going to benefit you as the teacher or the person involved in delivering? And I think that's a really important thing, and that will really sway that member, that teacher, that educator in whether they're going to keep using technology or not. I think at this point it's worth also saying that I guess the other challenge that colleagues do face, and this is something which isn't something that we as in the roles that we've got on this call today can necessarily fix, is there is obviously the wider challenge of the infrastructure. So the Wi-Fi or the internet infrastructure in the organization where you do your training or delivering or whatever it may be. So again, that's something else to consider, because there's nothing worse than being all gung-ho as a teacher thinking, great, I can use this piece of technology, I'm going to use it with my students in my lesson, and then the students not being able to connect to the Wi-Fi. So I think infrastructure is something else to consider. We go back to that things to consider when choosing apps, is thinking about the infrastructure as well, thinking about the Wi-Fi. I saw a teacher, because they were aware that some of their students were using their own data on their mobile devices, used to use color-coded QR codes to link to the different resources as a way of highlighting to the student resources that potentially would use more data and were best saved until a point where they had access to the Wi-Fi. So that's quite a nice thing to do, thinking about the resources, and this teacher had just color-coded the QR codes so the students knew that resource maybe used quite a bit of data, and would be best to wait for the Wi-Fi before they used it. So that's something else to consider, is that infrastructure and thinking about the students, certainly if you're asking them to engage via a mobile device, and that will impact on the way that you design the content, but it will also obviously definitely impact on the momentum. If we're looking at how we maintain that momentum, is if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, the students will not want to use it, and certainly from a staff perspective, a teaching perspective, they won't want to use it either. And that is probably one of the biggest killers of digital momentum, is the infrastructure. And I appreciate, depending on where you're on the globe, it's at different places, but certainly it's something to be aware of in the designing of content and the types of tools you're advising and activities you're designing and advising teachers to use. So I guess come to sort of the main sort of element, and the key thing that I think is really useful and really important when talking about education technology, and that is, how is this benefiting our students and benefiting the learning process? And there's various educational models out there. There's the TPAC model. In addition to this one, there are others as well. For me, the SAMR model is really, it's a nice balance. The TPAC goes into more detail, but the SAMR model is a nice way of linking and asking students, staff, to get staff to question how this piece of technology is benefiting and impacting on learning. I think it's very easy. Those of us who like technology may go, yay, it's shiny, I love a quiz or an activity. But I think it's really important to help the staff to explore that link with technology and pedagogy. How does that technology really benefit the learning activity that's happening? Some cases it's not, and that's fine. It may benefit engagement or something else, but I think it's really important to get teachers exploring that and understanding the use of that technology. So if we look at this model, the SAMR model, for me, it has, as you can see, those four phases that are broken into two elements. So the first two, the substitution and the augmentation, are very much enhancing. So they're enhancing an activity that you're doing. So for example, if we look at substitution, we could do a pen and paper quiz in a lesson, or we could use a tool such as quizzes or whatever it is we use. The benefit is marginal. If we look at it, yes, students may like the fact they're using their mobile device, if they're using quizzes or Kahoot or something like that, and that will drive up engagement. But in essence, we're still being able to judge students' knowledge, whether we do it as a pen and paper based activity or a digital activity. There are some benefits and enhancements. The types of response that students can make can vary. So if it's a traditional quiz, potentially you've got two types of response. It's a pen on paper, or potentially it's a hand up and a verbal response. If it's an electronic type activity, then there's different types of responses that students have the option to doing. But if you're looking at other benefits from a teacher perspective, they don't need to mark it. Potentially it's already auto marked. The results are collated and kept, which is great. And then if they want to check distance traveled, so how much students knew at the start of the topic and how much they used at the end of the topic, they can reuse the same quiz. But it's nothing that's mind-blowing. It's subtle enhancements. It's providing us with a subtle improvement as to the activity that we're doing. So we look at the next stage, augmentation, and that's where it's providing additional features. It's adding an element, an option that wasn't there available beforehand. So potentially it's in the sense of a quiz activity, it could be it's enabling you to do different types of activities like mark a spot on a diagram, or annotate an element, or whatever it may be, answer questions related to a video. So it's providing additional functionality within that augmentation stage. And then we move up to the next bit, which is transformation. And this is where some of the activities that we're doing with the technology are quite completely sort of transformational. So I guess the big one on that front, I guess the most transformational element is probably VR, virtual reality. You can imagine, or even so virtual reality is a big one. AR is another one, where students are being taken into spaces where they would never naturally be able to do. So I saw an organisation that has set up a virtual reality painting booth, and that meant that their students could experience what it was like to paint an automotive vehicle, where the reality of doing that in reality was just too expensive. The cost of the paint booth and the paint meant that wasn't possible. So potentially VR or AR allows us to arrive at environments or review and explore environments that we wouldn't naturally be able to do. I've seen some lovely stuff happening with the heart and exploring the heart and being able to actually walk through the heart and the different elements to it, the human heart. So there's all sorts of different things that we can do. But I think the overarching element here is getting staff to consider and see the benefit. And I think if they start to understand the benefit, one, it will help them to make more appropriate choices, but two, I think it will also help them to maintain their interest and maintain that digital momentum, because they can see the benefits that it has to the learner. So I think for me, any of the models, but certainly the SAMR one's a great starter for 10 in its enabling the teacher really to think about how is this benefiting the activity that I'm doing with students. It's so important, and I think if they get that understanding, it starts to get under their skin, and they go, oh, I think we could do this and that idea or this idea, and it really helps them to want to use digital as they go through and use it more fully. So I think that is me as far as the presentation. So I think I'm a couple of minutes quicker than we'd anticipated, but I hope that's okay. Are we okay to move on to questions? Is that okay?
Yep, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
A question from Suzanne. Thoughts on digital environment, show faces of participants, yay or nay? It's a tricky one. As someone who's delivered activities both with participants visible and participants not visible, I find it certainly easier as a deliverer to deliver with participants visible. I find that much easier to see people's faces. You can see their interactions. So that's my preference. However, I think it depends on the types of participants. I think for younger participants, potentially there's reasons not. I know that I mentioned at the start that there were the benefits during lockdown of widening student engagement and participation. I think we found some students actually preferred not to have the camera on, but preferred to engage via the chat. So I think it varies from participant to participant and the types of sessions you're running. Some participants will favour the chat and not having their camera on. Others are quite happy to have the camera on. For me personally, if I'm delivering a session, I love to see people who I'm delivering to. So Eric's got a question there: how to make interactivity and e-learning when you don't have them online at the same time? So for me, there's a number of asynchronous tools that we can use. So tools that we can ask them to engage with outside of that immediate space that they're in front of us. So one of the tools I mentioned was quizzes. And that has a homework feature, which means you can set a window of activity that the students can do, that the students have to do that activity. So they can engage with that quizzes outside of being directly in front of you. So they're not a line at the same time. They will have a particular time limit, and they will work through those questions within a window of whatever that is. Certainly during lockdown, we found that in certain cases, if you had multiple students in one house and maybe there was only one device, you couldn't get them all online at the same time anyway. So quizzes is one way. For me, tools like Wakelet, where you can set them an activity and they can be engaging at different points. Google Jamboard's another one where you can create an interactive whiteboard space and they can post at different points. So there's lots of ways that we can get engagement, lots of different tools out there that they can use asynchronously when they're online, and it doesn't matter that we're not online. We can still go back and review what they've done. So I hope that's given you some ideas, Eric. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you, James. I think we don't have any questions, but just one more comment that, yeah, Suzanne loved your advice to not immediately go to shiny and new or trending. Oh, we have one more question, James. Do you see that from Chris? Chris is asking, how would you suggest? Yeah, you see that.
Yeah. So Chris has
Great.
said, how would you suggest one communicates various live virtual training opportunities? We find if we put ILT in the LMS and hope people sign up, we don't get engagement. We put it on calendars, we get too many people. We get too many people who aren't interested. Yeah, it is a challenge. We've done a variety of things. This year, what we've done is we've posted. Last year we did lots of impromptu stuff, and we post it in our organisation's calendar, so we'd pop up there. We post it on our sort of, well, in essence, our Yammer community as a way of trying to drive business. But what we started doing was this year we've published a calendar with bite-sized training opportunities where we've set out for our whole year the activities we're going to be doing and when we're going to do them. And we've, so far, from the ones we've done, we've found we've had better engagement. So it is tricky. As with today's webinar, you'll get so many people sign up and a different number attend. I think it's just the nature of the beast. It is a tricky one. I think it's, as organisations, it's finding and communicating to staff the best and most appropriate ways of communicating it. So what we did is, during lockdown, we set up a Teams community for teachers, and we would post all of information about the events there, in addition to having them in calendars and emails. So that's potentially another way that you can do it, but it is tricky. Some colleagues just don't get the engagement that you want. So another question from Richard: do you have any thoughts or observations on digital assessment of learners? And secure I'm not familiar with the term e-proctoring. I don't know if any of the facilitators have heard of that term, or Richard, if you could pop back in the chat and just explain what you mean by e-proctoring, please. Okay, great, excellent. Yeah, it is a tricky one. Invigilating online exams, it is. In short, I haven't found a great way of doing that. In doing any kind of assessment, you certainly, if it's a remote assessment, you don't know if it's the student who's engaging with it or if it's someone else, if it's not in the location that they're there in front of you. So absolutely, that's a huge problem. If it's in a blended learning environment, so you've got the students in front of you at certain points, as well as doing the remote assessment, then obviously you can verify their knowledge, comparing what they responded virtually with what they're responding in person. But certainly there's an element of trust in that environment. As an organisation, trying to think how we've approached exams. Yeah, we have done a few environments where it's been fixed, and you can, in essence, you can see the learners, and as an invigilator, you can see all the learners engaging with the space, and they've got the webcam on, so you can see who's at the device. But it's a bit clunky, if I'm honest. So no, in short, Richard, sorry, it's a tricky one, because we just, at the end of the day, we don't always know who is the individual doing the exam. Okay, so another question from Bo: how do you get people to break out of their comfort zone? Have them think about learning and teaching in new and different ways. Bo, I guess for me, it's going back to modeling behaviors. So all of the training sessions I do, I will model behaviors. I will also go into spaces with them. So I will, I suppose, hold their hand in a virtual sense, and suggest something and give them a hand to do it. But for me, typically, it's if I do it in my classroom and they can see the benefits. The other benefit is if I get other teachers. So the challenge of being someone who likes technology is they look at me and say, well, of course James can do it, he knows technology. So I like to get colleagues who are vocational teachers who are confident at using it and get them to go and observe them. So if they see the chef doing a super quiz using technology, they see, well, if the chef can do it, I'm more likely to do it. So that's another way to do it. I asked them to go and observe a fellow teacher and look at how they're doing it. But I guess the key one, it links very much back to my previous points, which is it's highlighting the benefits to them. And I think if they see the benefit, whether that be student engagement or more time for discussions and activities in the classroom, they're more likely to have a go at using it. And that's what I found. And if I look at my YouTube channel and some of the comments I get on that, it's all about people going, I hadn't thought of that. That's great, saves me time. So yeah, it's about ideas, getting other people to showcase what they're doing, get them to look at how other people are working, and hopefully they will see the light and see the benefit and engage. Any more questions?
Yes, thank you, James, for your answers. Thank you very much for joining this session today. Thank you for spending this valuable hour with us. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you, James, again.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks all
Goodbye.
for your engagement and thanks for participating. Thank you.